welcome to our special edition series, SDGs and What You Need to Know. Together, we will be explaining and discussing the UN Sustainable Development Goals. Our mission is to educate everyday citizens about SDGs, what they are, what they mean, how the laws and policies that are and have been passed can and will affect us, not only here in Canada, but around the world. Additionally, by learning and understanding these 17 goals, we can all become one step closer in helping to affect change in this world from a grassroots perspective. My name is Kelsey from Saskatoon, along with Dave and Richard. We are Acres of Truth. Joining us is our special guest, Mark, who has been talking about the agenda for 20 years now. Welcome, gentlemen.
Greetings, Kelsey. It's Dave from Winnipeg, Ag Specialist.
Greetings, Kelsey. My name is Richard, and I'm a farmer from southern Saskatchewan.
Hi, Kelsey, Dave, and Richard. It's Mark here from Saskatoon, Director and Founder of the Forum for Canadian Sovereignty.
Welcome, gentlemen, and I'm Kelsey. I'm a small business owner in Saskatoon, Saskatchewan, Canada. The format of this series is for us to read the SDG, discuss the targets, and break it down for everyday people to understand. Let's get started with Sustainable Development Goal number 10, Reducing Inequalities. SDG number 10, or Reducing Inequalities, and ensuring no one is left behind are integral to achieving the Sustainable Development Goals. Inequality within and among countries is a persistent cause for concern. The effects of COVID-19 pandemic appear to be reversing any positive trends of narrowing income and inequality. The pandemic has also intensified structural and systemic discrimination. Emerging markets and developing economies are experiencing slow recoveries, widening disparities in income between countries. The number of refugees and migrant deaths worldwide reached the highest absolute number on record in 2021. Meanwhile, the war in Ukraine rages on, forcing even more people from their homes and creating one of the largest refugee crises in recent memory. With that, Mark, I'd like to turn the mic over to you.
So do you see how they pull at our heartstrings? They use COVID and they use the Ukraine war, of course, and all of these things that they created. We're supposed to be emptying our pockets for and emptying our public coffers to send money to them. And this is all by design, and it's all part of redistribution of wealth. Now, a very important part to this is the phrase, they want equality both within nation states and among nation states. So what does equality look like? So does that mean that us in Western civilization in the first world are way too, our standard of living is way too high? And in order to achieve that equality among countries, that they need to destroy the first world, they need to destroy our standard of living down to a second, third world standard so that we're all equal. And ultimately, that's their goal in the destruction of Western civilization and the first world, is to achieve this sense of equality and equity where everybody's equal, everybody's the same. That's socialism / communism. That's exactly what it is. Using obviously fascism as part of this convergence and this merging of the two to get the job done. And ultimately, if you look at everybody who leads any of the committees at the UN, for example, and I like to make this distinction for people because it's important. So the UN, all of their committees are run by people that come out of an international group called Socialist International. And if you look at all of these people, Antonio Guterres, the general of the UN, comes straight out of Socialist International, and all the committees and their chair people all come out of Socialist International. So that's the communist side of things. They're the UN Sustainable Development Agenda, the UN Agenda 2030. That's it. And then when you look at the World Economic Forum, that's sort of the fascist side of things. And this is where the two sort of, they meet, and they've officially partnered now as of June of 2019. So again, goal number 10 is about equality, both within nation states. So all these nation states throughout the world, throughout the third and second world, are supposed to adhere to equality. Well, imagine instituting or implementing these policies in the dead of Africa or in the Middle East, where you have religions that are dictating the terms of people's lives. Do you think for a second that they're going to change their fundamental belief system to acquiesce into this agenda so everybody in their society is equal? It's not going to happen. But they did sign on to it, and they love to see what we're doing to our society as we crush our civilization and our societies that we've built based on, the fundamentals of of Western civilization, of freedom and liberty and justice and equality under the law and all these good things. They would like nothing more than to see us destroy ourselves from the inside out, which is exactly what we're doing.
Yeah, for sure. And we're destroying ourselves because we do not actually, promote people to be the best they can be. We promote them to be the menial average, to obtain that goal. And that's where we're at, is we got this just 50% average is where they want everybody. And we're destroying ourselves because the communist countries, already have the power, and they're not going to give that up. I mean, they would love to take on the world and make it communism, but I mean that's not going to happen either. So we're destroying ourselves by trying to, keep up these goals and fulfill these goals. It's ridiculous.
Yeah, and I look at the SDG point 10.1 target to grow the bottom 40%. And we know statistically there is a percentage of that population that struggles to grow no matter what. We have people that choose a lifestyle of being homeless, living on the streets, living meal to meal. This is who they are. And when they're given anything more, they squander it. The addictions, the alcoholism, that lifestyle, there is an allure to that where they're free and they can go do whatever they want when they want. I find that particularly interesting is how are these people are going to live in this new society, because they're not largely participating in the one we're in right now. And so to, give everybody a purple ribbon for participation, it's like they're not having it and they're not participating. And it, as Richard said, like, why are we going to take our top 1% of high achievers and marginalize them? Those are our think tanks. These are the people that are resourceful. They're bringing new technologies, new ways of thinking about things, how we've been doing processes and improving them over time. We're not going to be encouraging that. In fact, we're going to be doing the opposite and stifle it. And to Kelsey's point, where no one is left behind. And you mentioned the COVID pandemic, or plandemic, as we've been referring to it here. Well, we leave everybody except those who are unvaccinated or chose not, or perhaps they were injured. What do we do with those? Are we leaving those behind? Because I very clearly see this agenda leaving 17 to 20% of our population behind over and over, whether it's through choice of medical freedom or lifestyle.
Well, in that case, we just push euthanasia. Made.
There you go. Yeah.
Right. And I mean, that narrative has already leaked into this overall discussion, that if you're struggling because you're poor, MAID might be an option for you. We've heard that narrative. We've heard it discussed. So, and even on a macro scale, if you look at the world as a whole, there's a certain number of countries, and most of them are within that 135 I mentioned, that have never embraced, let's say, free market capitalism. They've always lived under and are comfortable culturally living under, a dictatorship or despotism or some form of totalitarian authoritarian government. And that's just what and who they are. And they've never taken steps to actually pull themselves out of that. And so why is it now our responsibility to ensure that, they are equal to us? And we're never going to bring the second and third world up to our standard of living. It's never going to happen. So the reverse is true. Let's destroy the first world, make everybody equal by destroying what we've built. As you said, welcome to communism.
Are you enjoying this episode? You can find all previous episodes at acresoftruth.com. Yeah, exactly, Mark. And, 10.2, the target 10.2 for this particular SDG states by 2030, empower and promote the social, economic, and political inclusion of all, irrespective of age, sex, disability, race, ethnicity, origin, religion, or economic or other status. And so this sort of just speaks to me and reeks of socialism in and of itself. And so I think due to the nature of this particular SDG and what, it just speaks of socialism as a whole, I think it's really important to explain to the listeners how to understand what socialism really is, because a lot of people that I find in the everyday, on the surface, they think that this stuff is great. They think, there's so much virtue signaling, for example, to to want to have this, to be equal, and I think that even in our youth, we're seeing this agenda while being indoctrinated into the youth quite heavily, and that these ideas are something that are very virtuous. And but what they don't understand is what socialism really means. And so, how do you think that we should explain that? How do we educate our youth and the people that don't truly understand what socialism is? I think that is a takeaway that needs to be had, specifically related to this particular SDG.
Well, I don't think you're ever going to convince an avowed socialist that socialism isn't good, right? I mean, there's communists amongst us that believe, their ideology is the best. Now, of course, they've never read a history book. They've never been taught what history has shown us that socialism and communism does to a society. There's enough history to know that in a socialist communist nation or even continent, it only spells death, mass death, and mass starvation. and I mean, it's ultimately everybody has to be the lowest common denominator, right? Because we can't have anybody achieving anything more than anybody else. And so everybody has to be the same. Everyone has to be equally poor and equally dependent on the government that is controlling everybody's lives. And that's essentially where we're all headed if we don't say no to this.
Exactly. And to that point, we need to only look at World War II and Stalin. A decision came whether or not someone had a better idea, and this is talking in military terms of building munitions and artillery and those types of things. So if an individual was to actually be recognized for their achievement as an individual versus the state, they would always choose the state. So no matter what achievements these individuals came up with, no matter how good it was, if that meant that they would elevate their status by even just the slightest of margins, the government would oppress it and say, no, we are not having it. And so this is, it's within our parents' lifetimes and some of our lifetimes, maybe. I don't know how old you guys are, but this is not in the distant past. And when I look at the target 10.3, again, who is the one evaluating the metrics? What are the targets? And again, this goes to the education systems. These are our socialists that have got degrees in masters of what? Nonsense, of nothing. They will be the ones deciding how we're defining laws and eliminating discriminatory laws, policies, practices, and then promoting appropriate legislation. Like, are you kidding me? Can you define that? These, in my estimation, should be the last people to define those policies. It should people within their own groups and cultures deciding how they want to regulate and govern themselves. Because again, you're hitting a quota and a target, and it's like, yes, you could be hitting an arbitrary target, but it isn't good for anybody. But again, it speaks to your whole massive death, massive starvation, and that ultimately, when you keep that as an undertone, a lot more of this makes sense, because this isn't about keeping people happy, because there's no way first world nations are going to be happy living in a third world situation, not knowing where the next meal comes from, or if the government decides to push a button because you didn't act according to their will, no lunch for you. No extracurricular activity for you, no YouTube for you, no self-service for you. And this can be done on a whim, because, as we're going to talk next about our smart cities, AI and intelligence and technology is what's going to be driving this. And so, that we're going to see Big Brother with a big stick around the corner. It's quite the opposite. Is you're going to have freedom, except that you're going to be shackled to your smart device. People need to think about this again in a broader context. It's like, look at the undertones. What is the message? Because the wording is scripted very nicely.
It's interesting when they talk about, and they put out these narratives, and they're very finely crafted narratives. They're done with purpose and with intent. And so we talk about this idea of diversity, but what they're actually pushing, they actually don't want diversity. They want the opposite of diversity, where they want everybody seen as the same. They don't celebrate the differences, as we've seen the last 3 years, and the discriminatory practices implemented by our government here in the Free West. It actually doesn't equate to diversity. It equates to everybody being the same, everybody being equal, and that's what socialism and communism is. So people have to recognize this.
And ultimately, everybody is disposable.
Yes.
You speak against the narrative, or you speak against authoritarian power, you will be oppressed into submission, or something worse could happen. Who knows? We see this in China, lots of people disappearing, and it's like family, nobody questions it because they could be next.
Sure. I mean, we've seen it in every totalitarian, authoritarian state in the history of the world, that they'll just eliminate you. They'll just get rid of you, because as our prime minister said, when do we not tolerate these people? That he was referring to us. When do we not tolerate them anymore? They're taking up space. Like, that is, if that doesn't sound like Hitler or Stalin, I don't know what does. And this is in 2021 in Canada.
Bill Gates and his motto of useless eaters resonates well with me.
Yeah, when we talk about, socialism, capitalism, whatever we want to define ourselves at, that's where it kind of gets confusing to most people, I think, and even to myself at times, right? And then you talk about communist or nationalists, and so we call them evil side China or Russia, right? They're communist countries. And really, what I really kind of break it down to is we got two accesses going on, very, two accesses of how the world will function. And
turn upon, right? So, in the West here, we have the, public and private partnerships going on, right? And the countries that we call West, but I would say they're more democratic because they include Australia, New Zealand, and UK, and countries like that, and ourselves in Canada and United States as well, right? So, so then you got the World Economic Forum, you got the UN and the World Bank that are basically playing, the setting the rules and implementing laws through our governments, right? And the corporations are all on top of that. So that's our system that we got going on. And what's their goal? To control land, food supply, energy, finance, and all that. Now you take the access of the communist countries that we call communist. No, they're not. They're actually a nationalized, country that everything is nationalized, more socialistic for sure, right? So which are Russia, China, Iran, Turkey, so on and so forth. And they actually have developed, as you talked on the last one, Mark, they developed the BRIC system, which under the cross-border international banking system is already in existence. And then they have their nationalist corporations that are, helping achieve that, goal. But what's their goal? To control the land, control the food supply, control the energy and finance. So, so both sides are actually trying to take control of everything.
You are listening to an Acres of Truth podcast. Join us in the conversation over on Twitter. Our handle there is @AcresOfTruth, or to find more episodes, visit acresoftruth.com.
Well, and it's confusing for folks, especially our youth, and when you try to explain this, because what we've seen in the last number of decades is not free market capitalism. We've seen this crony capitalism, where we see these public-private partnerships and this crony capitalism rather than a true free market based capitalism, and so it's confusing for people, and even the hardcore lefties that rail against capitalism, well, they're railing against what they see, and what they see is fascism, is this crony capitalism where you have government public private partnerships, and that's what they rail against, but they don't understand that their organization is funded by the same people they're railing against. And so it becomes very confusing for the youngsters, for sure.
Yeah, that did help answer the question, and I would imagine that that'll help the listeners too. Yeah, you guys are very good at explaining all that stuff, that's for sure. That's a wrap, folks. You've been listening to an Acres of Truth special edition podcast series. We would like to thank you so much for joining us in this journey. If you found this episode valuable, please share it with others on your social media platforms. Be sure to check out our website, acresoftruth.com, for more information on other podcasts and where you can find them. Additionally, feel free to send your questions or comments to info@acresoftruth.com. Thanks again for listening.